Hey folks, you're listening to episode 49 of the Deeply Devoted Podcast, a ministry of the E-Free Church of Bemidji, Minnesota. My name is Eric Nygren. I'm one of the pastors on staff here at E-Free Bemidji. And with me today in the Deeply Devoted Podcast studio is Brandon Mustful. Brandon is joining me today as my guest to chat about Christians in the marketplace and what it looks like to live out our faith in Christ at work. Now, we're also going to touch a bit on our church's strategic ministry plan and learn a little bit about Brandon's role in that process, how we got there. So I want to jump right into it. Brandon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to have a good time here in this conversation. We're going to start in one direction, and then I promise we'll get to our topic at hand here eventually. But first of all, Brandon, why don't you just kind of introduce yourself a little bit? What do we need to know about who you are? And maybe tell us a little bit about how and when you got connected with our church here.
Well, I grew up in the Twin Cities in Champlin, Minnesota, and I moved to Bemidji in 2012. Actually, I was finishing up a master's degree in public policy at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs and looking for other opportunities, and I saw an announcement for a job at the Beltrami Humane Society, and I had no prior animal experience. But I read the position description. I said, well, I can do that, and I can do that, and I can do that. So I submitted my resume, and I got the job because I'm kind of business-minded, and they actually wanted somebody that wasn't too emotionally attached to animals. So that's kind of how we came to Bemidji, Shelley and I, and then we just looked around at about maybe it was like 3 or 4 churches, and we did come here, and we heard Pastor Fred and his sermon, and I liked this sounds really terrible, but I liked the music that we sang that day.
That's fair. Yeah.
Horrible, reason to pick a church, but so we decided to come here, and then of course Pastor Fred is retired, and it's been all downhill since then, but just kidding.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned Shelley, so you are actually officially the second Mustful on the podcast here. And I don't know if you know this. I don't know if she knows this, but Shelley was back. Well, she knows that she was back on episode 4 of this podcast. She shared a bit of her faith journey, but I looked back at the listings, and that is actually the second most popular episode of our what is now 49 episodes of the podcast. So I'm wondering, Brandon, where do you think our conversation is eventually going to rank in say the top 50 here?
Well, first off, I did mention to her last night that her podcast was number 2, and she very humbly responded, "Oh, I thought I was number 3." But there's no way that I'm going to top her. She's far more interesting than I am.
It was a great conversation, and this is going to be a fun one too, and because really, speaking of episodes here, Brandon, here's my transition. If I had a nickel for every time that Brandon quoted a line or referenced a scene from the TV show The Simpsons, I'd probably be maybe not a millionaire, but I'd have some good change in my pocket here. But Brandon, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this topic. Because it might kind of be a little nerdy and
it's going to shoot down your ratings big time.
But I thought it would be a good way to kind of get to know you. And Brandon, tell us a little bit why that show resonates with you so much.
Well, I just I kind of grew up with it, and
I did too.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of relevant things in there that really truly relate to real life. And it's extremely satirical, and they stop at nothing. They make fun of anything and everyone, and there's a lot of smart jokes in there. So the guys that originally, worked on that show and wrote it and everything, they had very high levels of education, and even now, I can watch an episode from 1992, and it's still funny, and there's new things that sometimes there'll be something that'll happen to me in life today. I'll hear a song or I'll hear about some historical thing, and I'll be like, oh, that's what was going on in The Simpsons.
That was the reference?
Yeah.
Right. And that was what they were satirizing? Yeah.
Right. And it's 30 years later, right. and I'm still, these things are being revealed to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't follow the show really anymore. Like I kind of grew up with it a little bit, or it was kind of in that season of life. I guess it would have been kind of high school era or something like that, middle school, something like that. I did follow that show for, I don't know, maybe 7-8 years, 7-8 seasons. I guess it's in season 37 and has been officially renewed for at least through season 40.
Wow.
But you're right. I mean, back in those early years, it was really known for some big comedy writers were writers for that show.
Yeah.
And, even names that probably we would know today that are comedians or talk show hosts or things like that.
I mean, Conan O'Brien is an example of somebody who was a writer.
Right, a name that maybe people would know. And of course, it's not a show for everyone. This is not necessarily an endorsement, but I agree. It was a show that did a great job of just, they commented, like you said, on everyday life situations, a really good sense of humor. And yes, a lot of satire. And what was interesting is they weren't shy, and probably still aren't shy about satirizing religion or even evangelical Christianity. And I don't know that they're making fun of, in the sense of trying to demean, but satire is about to point out the obvious absurdities of things. So, Brandon, why do you think Christians were such an easy target on a show like that? And even, do you have any of the favorite religious themed episodes?
Well, like you said, it's going to grab anything and anyone in their path and find a way to satirize it. And yeah, I think especially the idea of like a conservative, Christian is probably a pretty easy target. And they use God a lot. He's been in the show many, many times. But what's so funny is they never show his face, right? Because no one's ever seen God's face. So you just see him from like the shoulders down. And there are some really funny, religious episodes. There's one in particular where Homer joins a cult, the Movementarians, and one line from Bart, he said, "Church, cult, church. What's the difference? So we get bored someplace else every week." And basically, Marge, she ends up getting out of the cult, and they're trying to get Homer out, but he's just really into the leader. He's obsessed with the leader, and they finally get some beer on his tongue, one drop of beer, and that saves him. and they end up exposing the Movementarian leader who was just after their money, and all's well that ends well in that episode.
Yeah,
there's another episode where Bart is a healer. And it's pretty funny. He thinks he's actually like healing people, but Lisa, of course, she's the constant skeptic. One of my favorite lines again from Bart there is this other spiritual leader is trying to convince Bart to really believe in Christ, and Bart's like, I'm just gonna go live my life the way I want and do the deathbed repentance, but then the spiritual leader guy is like, well, but what if you have a sudden death? You fall off a cliff or get hit by a truck or something. And so Bart's like, full coverage. So he really considers, being a believer just so you can have, full coverage no matter what happens.
Right. Again, I think they exaggerate the absurdity of things, that maybe people don't actually behave this way, but it does maybe shine a light on some of the things, some of the behaviors of people and try to think through that, what do we really believe? I remember a few episodes, they dealt with things in the early seasons, about why do we go to church, and some of these things. There's a lot of episodes where...
Well, there was one where Homer refused to go to church, and he was just living it up on Sunday mornings, and then, of course, there was a fire, and Ned Flanders saved him. It must have been Ned must have just come home from church, maybe, I'm not sure, but yeah, he saved him from the fire, and then Homer and Ned were best friends. And
so I remember watching some of these, and in fact, I grabbed this book off my shelf. It's called The Gospel According to the Simpsons. I should lend this to you, Brandon. Yeah. It's probably 20, 25 years old. Published 2001. But it was a really interesting book, The Spiritual Life of the World's Most Animated Family. And it kind of comments on that of just, the idea is this is an animated show. It's a cartoon, not really a kid's show, but, a day in the life of this family and, the average American family, what is their level of spirituality, their religious affiliation, and things like that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. Now, again, we're not going to beat this topic to death here, but, even for those people who have never watched that show, culturally, especially in the 90s and maybe early 2000s, everybody knew the names Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, right? It was just part of pop culture. But Brandon, and you mentioned him, there's a character on that show named Ned Flanders. For those that aren't familiar with the show, what was his role on the show?
Well, he's the annoying neighbor, and he drives Homer crazy, and he is an extremely conservative Christian, and he takes it to the extreme. So we're talking like a Pharisee, right? All
Right.
the little rules that they have to follow in that household, and his kids Rod and Todd are, they are also the perfect little angel kids, but again, it's like to the extreme where it's just kind of absurd, right? With that said, Ned is a deeply flawed character, and they actually have an episode that explains how he became the way he is. His parents were beatniks, and they had no rules whatsoever. He had no boundaries or anything. And eventually he was put into a spanking study at the University of Minnesota, of all places, where he was spanked nonstop for like 30 days. And then at the end of it all, the doctor's like, or the researcher, he's like, "How do you feel?" And Ned's like, "I feel fine." And it pretty much warped his whole way of thinking.
Yeah, and I think it illustrates, again, it's an exaggeration, but maybe just the way the non-Christian world might view
definitely
the very religious Christian, or whether they understand the term evangelical or not, the one who's very moralistic and has keeps a strict, as you said, it kind of pharisaical and things like that. And so it's sort of a window into maybe how the non-believing world views Christians, right? And so here's my lead into our main topic today. Again, we're not going to spend much more time here on The Simpsons, but I think it'll help us lead to where we're going. So I'm going to call this episode we're doing here, Brandon, Faith at Work, because we're talking about Christians in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And, for 2,000 years of church history, Christians in every culture have wrestled with what is their place in the broader culture. This biblical concept of being in the world but not of the world, and trying to nuance that of what does that mean, and what does it mean just in the public sphere, but what does it mean in the workplace, and things like that. And so a character like a Ned Flanders on the Simpsons is an extreme example of somebody who he's in the world, but he does not want to be of the world, and he makes really clear distinctions. So Brandon, here's my point. Why is this topic of a Christian's place in the marketplace something we should even consider?
Well, because most of us are going to church once a week, and we're maybe interacting with people in that culture and church on a limited basis. The rest of our lives, we're out among everyone else, and we have there's a lot of ethical questions, a lot of difficult challenges, and we need to be prepared ahead of time how we're going to respond to that, and how we're going to deal with it. And we also need to be connected to the Lord, and be in the Word and be in prayer, to avoid our own sin and our own selfishness, and our own the things that we want, that we might want to get ahead, and things like that could affect our decisions in the marketplace and really affect, how somebody views us. And then even beyond that, you're going to be a target too. There are going to be people that know that you have something, that they don't have, and they're going to be pretty bitter about it, and they're going to find ways to bring you down, so to speak. I know that sounds pretty cryptic, pretty harsh, but I believe it's true.
Right. Yeah, and depending on maybe when you came to faith in Christ, if you came to faith early on and you've sort of been in the Christian church world a long time, it's easy to forget just kind of how the rest of the world operates.
Yeah.
But for maybe some other folks who came to faith maybe later in life, they maybe remember a season where maybe they looked at that fellow believer or that other believer, in the workplace or their neighbor or something like that, and didn't fully understand what was going on, what made them, a Christian, and they use terms like what makes you so why is Brandon so religious all the time? And that's the word they have to use to try to capture it.
Yeah.
We I think we need to think through this so that we don't sort of think that the world is our enemy, but we do look at the world through very different lenses.
Yeah, and it's really easy to get frustrated and to say, "Oh, why do they do that?" When for us as Christians, looking at people that we're working with, we can get frustrated with their behaviors. But then you have to stop and think, well, but if they don't know Jesus, why would they act any differently?
Right.
Like you're saying, you have to look at where they're coming from.
Right. So, Brandon, maybe tell us a little bit about some of the jobs that you've had over the years, and in particular, how have some of those experiences taught you about living out your faith in the workplace?
Well, I've been involved in community development and nonprofits for a long time. I was after college, I was in the Peace Corps in Paraguay. I served there for 27 months. From there, I worked at the Salvation Army in Brooklyn Park, and then I came up here to run the Beltrami Humane Society, now called Great River Rescue, and after that, I've been at Northwoods Habitat for Humanity for the last couple of years, and I'm just learning. I'm just learning and growing in every one of these places. And there's so many things that I wish I would have done differently, but it's too late. You can't go back and do it differently. Right. The number one thing is, I wish that I would have been more focused on my faith and on Christ. And I've been a believer my whole life, but that maturity has been just coming along, and I'm still like so far away from where I want to be. But with that said, even going back to the Peace Corps, where I made a lot of mistakes, but I think I built some really strong and deep relationships. And even just yesterday, I sent a happy birthday message on WhatsApp to one of my friends down there in Paraguay, and I still talk to people every several months. And like I said, they came to know me and respect me for who I was and the beliefs that I had. And I was going to they had a Catholic church and they had an evangelical church, and I would go to both of these churches, and then they would always ask me about the people going to the Catholic church, and then they're asking me about the people going to the evangelical church, and I was just kind of the middleman and trying to keep the peace and everything. But moving on from there, running a smaller town humane society. Anybody who hasn't done it, there's no way that you can appreciate what you go through. It's an extremely emotional field that requires a lot of really tough decisions, and there's a lot of expectations on you. And I had to try to remain, steadfast with following my Christian beliefs and following the Lord and believing that He was going to step up for me. And that organization, it was it was in a really difficult spot when I started. Very little money. We were in debt, bad community reputation, and I had no idea what I was doing. Like I said, I'd never done anything with animals other than the pets that I had when I grew up. But I trusted that God was going to take care of us, and I had plenty of moments where I had my doubts, and God always showed up, and He did it in amazing ways, and that really helped bolster my faith and help me to lead with integrity. And there were several instances where my leadership was questioned. I actually had to go through 2 investigations into my conduct, which I am not perfect, and of course I'm not going to go into detail on this podcast, but that's the kind of scrutiny that you're under. And yeah, I always just tried to uphold, what I felt was right, and trying to appreciate at the same time that I don't always know what the right thing to do is, but while respecting my community, respecting my board members and things like that. So I don't know. That's kind of a long-winded, complicated response, but.
Well, and I think it is. You said you're kind of learning as you go, and even as you reflect back, if there was a way that you could go back in time and maybe change or warn yourself or something, you would, but you can't, and so you try to just learn from your experience, your positive and your negative. But you're hired for a job. This is what they ask of you to do. But you are a Christian, and you are trying to live out your faith, not just your ethics, but as a believer, we understand that we are to go and make disciples, right, of all nations, and maybe I would say of all situations, right? And so Brandon, one of the things that has come up a few times in our Friday morning men's discipleship group sometimes has been, what are some wise ways of sharing the gospel, doing evangelism at work? And so, Brandon, maybe you could comment just, is it appropriate to speak about your faith in Christ with your non-Christian coworkers? And how do you navigate those situations maybe when the opportunity is there?
Yeah, and I feel really unqualified to answer that question, but my belief is yes, absolutely. You can talk about your faith, you can talk about Christ. What you need to do is be in prayer and be in communion with the Lord yourself, and then ask Him, show me where you're working and where you want to use me. That we're here to partner with Him. It's not about us and what we want to accomplish. He's going to accomplish what He wants to accomplish, and we're just privileged if He allows us the opportunity to be part of that. So if you keep your eyes open, your ears open, those opportunities are going to come up. And when they do, then you can have those conversations with your coworkers, and while at the same time being sensitive and not shoving something down their throat. But everybody, when we were doing our strategic planning, one of the things that was obvious from the research that we looked at is people are just desperate for connection.
Yeah.
But they're also really skeptical of churches. So you have a great opportunity to connect with somebody outside of a church and build that relationship. And most of the time, they're going to be receptive because they need to hear the gospel truth. And if things don't go well, then maybe take a step back and keep praying about it. But as far as I know, we're still in a country that you're allowed to speak what you believe.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And I think there is a fine line, and it's harder for me because most of my vocational career has been in a church setting, in a ministry setting. And so it's helpful for me to kind of stop and think about what everybody else is doing Monday through Friday, or through the week. I mean, what the normal people, if I can say it that way, that aren't in ministry full time, of what it's like to navigate your faith in the workplace, and to test those waters and to build, because you do, the people you work with, you do build a relationship with, even if you don't, they're not your best friends, they're not people you would spend a lot of time with, maybe outside work. You build a relationship, and whatever it is that's important to you should kind of come out, just as maybe what's important to them will come out. Maybe they'll talk about their family, or their, even if it's more surfacey, their sports team that they live and die by, and things like that. And so I think it's normal that those things come out. And just because it's in the spiritual realm, I don't think those have to be awkward or strange or taboo topics.
Yeah, and at the same time, I don't exactly advocate for just like letting it ride for 10 years. Oh, they'll ask me when they're ready, kind of a thing.
Right.
And that does go back a little bit to Bart's rationale of having full coverage. You don't know when that person's going to get called. And so, right, it's like you need to, obviously you need to build a relationship, and it does take time. But at the same time, you can't just sit around and wait either. We really need to be telling people. Because life goes by fast. And,
yes.
And, maybe that person, before you know it, they leave and take another job or something. You never told them about Christ.
Right. And I think it would be a shame if, you left that position or they left that position, and at the end of that time, they found out that you were a Christian, and they said, I would have never guessed that about Brandon. We've been working together for 10 years, and I never knew that was true of him.
Right.
That would be a real shame, and probably something we need to rethink through. So, well, Brandon, sometimes we talk about, especially in a ministry context, we talk about calling. We think of someone who is called into the mission field or pastoral ministry or some kind of full-time ministry. But what about people who are not in full-time ministry? What about Christians whose vocation is something other than ministry? In what sense might we say Brandon is called to these jobs that you've had? Brandon, what is your sense of calling? In the workplace.
Boy, this is a hard-hitting podcast. You ask so many hard questions. Again, I don't have an answer for you. What I can tell you is, before I joined the Peace Corps, I was an intern at the Department of Treasury, and more specifically, I was more deeply involved in the Alcohol, Tobacco, Tax, and Trade Bureau, and I was doing a great job. And they would have hired me, right out of college, and I just knew that I did not want to sit behind a desk in Washington, D.C., right out of college. And since that time, I've been trying to figure out my calling.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I'm called to serve, and that's been the main reason why I've been in different nonprofit organizations. But I've had a lot of struggles, and it's been really difficult. More recently, in the last few years, I started my own consulting business, Mustful Strategic Consulting, and that is something that I believe that I'm called to do. It's like I said, it's taken a long time to figure out exactly where my skill sets are and how I can use them, for God's kingdom. But I do believe and hope that's something that I can do more of, where I'm not just, we look at the example of the Humane Society. I was there for 11 years. The whole thing turned around for the better. And like I said, I made a lot of mistakes, but we really improved the operations, improved the reputation. Everything about the organization did better. I feel like I can bring that to other organizations, other business leaders, other churches with my ability to see the bigger picture, organize things, and help move things forward.
Yeah, I think calling. We again, I think we use it a lot in these more ministry contexts, I believe that people are called to whatever vocation. It doesn't have to be a ministry vocation. I really do believe people are called, but at the same time, it's not this mystical experience, and it I don't fully understand how the Lord sovereignly works through things like resumes and interviews and the normal process of searching for a job and interviewing for a job and landing a job. Because even in the ministry world, we do those things. When we have an open position at the church, we gather resumes, we do interviews, we call references, and yet we also pray and just seek the Lord's face. And I always think that's an interesting thing because, oftentimes the prayers are something like, Lord, you already have the person in mind for this position. And we could just coast and we could just wait until, Joe or Sally or whoever it is just shows up and says, I feel led to come and fill this position. It's probably not going to happen that way. But it does, that there's a cooperation process. And I think that happens in the non-ministry context as well. That if we're prayerful about what the Lord would have us do, through our education or preparation or skill building, that the Lord's going to lead us to the right place, and He's going to sovereignly move those pieces so that you end up where you end up. And you're right. I mean, it's that where you were doesn't necessarily, just because you were called to wherever, doesn't mean that it's going to be smooth sailing over those 11 years or whatever.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm definitely really annoyed by people that are like, when they were like 8 years old, I felt called to be, this, and then that's what they've been their whole life. And it's like, I'm so happy for you.
Not your experience. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's not true for a lot of people. And a calling is a deeply personal thing in between you and the Lord. But, you have to involve others as well to help you.
Yes. Yeah.
Help you learn what that calling might be as well, because they can see things that you can't.
Right.
And I want to tie it in with strategic planning.
Yeah.
Something that I do a lot of with my consulting business. The strategic plan itself is not as valuable as the process of doing strategic planning. You learn a lot in going through that process, which involves conflict and a lot of difficult decisions and information gathering, and a lot of really boring stuff sometimes too. But you learn a lot about your organization. So likewise, through all the experiences that you have, you learn about yourself personally and who you want to be.
Right. Brandon, do you want to define for us what strategic planning is, and maybe let us know, how did you get interested in that field?
Yeah, it's a process of understanding strategic issues, so issues that affect your ability to achieve your mission, and understanding your place in the world, basically your environment, your strengths and weaknesses. And using all that information to develop rational, what word am I looking for? Deliberate ideas about who you are and where you're going and how you're going to get there. It's a roadmap to where you're going. Now the future is uncertain, so that's where strategic plans can get a bad rap, because people think that, oh, okay, I've got this map for the next 5 years. I'm just going to do everything on here.
Just follow the playbook, right? Yeah.
But yeah, you say playbook, just like in a football game, you come in with a plan, and then, it kind of goes down the toilet when you find out, how challenging the other team is. So, but that doesn't mean you don't make a plan. That doesn't mean that the football coach, he's still going to spend all week preparing for that next team.
Yeah.
And he's going to prepare differently for, the Bengals than he will for the Bears or the Broncos. I'm picking all B teams, I guess. But that's the same thing with your organization, your business. You want to plan and prepare, but make a plan that's flexible, and understand that, that there's going to be changes as you go. I got involved with it because at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, I had a class with John Bryson, a leader in strategic planning. And one class in particular, we did some action-oriented strategy mapping. We were in groups and just did it was like we're a pretend organization. And we developed a strategic plan in like 2 hours. And it was really cool and impactful. And then when I came to the Humane Society, we didn't have any kind of plan. So I was like, well, I had this class, like 6 months ago. I mean, well, and I still had the textbook. Let's just do what it says in here.
Yeah.
And we developed a strategic plan. And then after 2 years, things had changed so much that we developed another strategic plan. And I felt like that was kind of one of the main impetus for all the positive change. And then Habitat for Humanity called, and well, we need a strategic plan, and so I helped them with theirs, and then going a little bit further in my career, again, I was trying to figure out my calling. I wasn't feeling like being the executive director of a humane society was going to be what I was going to do till I retired, and so through a lot of prayer and conversations, I decided to start my own business in doing that.
Well, so more than a year ago now, our church said, "Hey, Brandon, we want to develop a strategic plan. We're starting to think about some of these questions. Can you help us?" And that's what brought about what we now know as our church's mission and vision and core values and our discipleship pathway.
That's good. 'Cause for a second, I thought you were going to say, and that was the biggest mistake we ever made.
Yeah, it was no. I mean, we're even this Sunday here, we're going to be back to the 4 Gs, right? That's something that was birthed out of that whole process. The gather, grow, give, and go. So Brandon, tell us a little bit about the part that you played in our own church's strategic ministry plan.
Well, I'm a facilitator, so the idea is not that I tell you what you should be doing, but that I just help organize the process, create forums for ideation and decision making, and it was challenging because I, of course, made a plan. Okay, here's how we're going to develop our strategic plan, and I created a proposal. But then by the time the elders wanted to, talk to me about it again, I completely changed the proposal. And then by the time we started doing strategic planning, we started going one way, and then I'm like, oh, but let's do it this way. And then it's like, oh, no, wait, we got to do this. And everything changed as we went. So it was not exactly a linear process.
Yeah.
But like I said, it was a process of learning, and it did give us opportunities to really think deliberately and strategically about who we are as a church and how we want to actually define becoming a deeply devoted follower of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think we needed some direction and because when you get 16, 18 ministry leaders, staff and volunteers in a room, you get all kinds of ideas of what we should do and why we should do it and the way we used to do it and the way we
I think church consulting is not for the faint of heart, for sure.
But it's people that are passionate about local church ministry and in particular their local church. So it'll be neat to just kind of see over the years here, Brandon, how the Lord uses that strategic consulting. I guess maybe not ministry, but it could be a ministry.
Yeah, why not?
In the sense of that strategic consulting work. Because sometimes it'll be in a church context, and sometimes it'll be in a nonprofit and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like right now, I'm talking to another Christian business leader. He owns businesses, but they have nothing to do with a ministry. But he told me what I want to do mission work. I want to spread the gospel through these businesses that I run.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about strategic planning. We've talked about living out our faith in the workplace, Christians in the marketplace. So I want to kind of open end here. Brandon, what do you think our church should be thinking about? I'm going to give you the microphone here for a second here. And what's one thing that you would want our church really to think through with respect to all the things we've been talking about today?
I just think that no matter what, we need to be in the Word, and we need to be in prayer, and really looking to the Lord. But then in communion with each other as well, and that's why church is so important, and the G of gathering is so important. And it's probably ironic coming from me because I don't like going down to the cafe and sitting around and chatting about anything. But that doesn't mean I don't like you. I just don't really. It just doesn't interest me. Oftentimes, I'm already thinking about the next thing that I have to get done, and that's just my personality. But it's important to recognize that we need each other, and everybody is unique and special, and God made us like that on purpose. So I think we need to focus on community, but that's a lot of that's internal stuff, and that's where I think we need to do a better job of being more externally focused, and bringing more people into our church. I think sometimes we get so focused on being as biblical as we possibly can that we scare away other people, and that's not. I'm not saying we should absolutely be 100% biblical, but we need to be open to bringing more people in here so they can hear and be part of all the good things going on.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, and there are a lot of good things going on. I just even think about the start of ministries coming up this week with our kickoff and everything kind of restarting here for the school year. I'm excited about what's happening here, but I love that focus of it's not just about what happens here in particular in our building. This really needs to be a sending center because we are out in the community. We are working in the community and living in the community, and our kids are in schools and things like that. So we are part of the greater Bemidji community, and not just this local church community. So that's a great reminder. Yeah.
I want to go back to one thing with The Simpsons in case anybody is still listening. The one hugely redeeming quality of The Simpsons is that it's family centered, and that it's about a family that has a lot of problems, but they stick together, and they Homer does love his family. He's faithful to his wife, and they get through thick and thin together. So anybody that is maybe they're offended by the fact that we talked about The Simpsons. I get it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kind of raunchy stuff on there, but at the same time, it's at its core, it's about a family that sticks together.
That is interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Just that's lots of TV shows that try to depict the average American family, some better, some worse, and kind of an interesting commentary on family life. Yeah. Well, Brandon, at the end of every episode here on the podcast, I like to ask my guests one last question. At our church, as you mentioned, we are all about becoming deeply devoted followers of Jesus together. So, Brandon, what's one thing that you have been blessed by lately that is deepening your own devotion to Jesus?
I read a book called Experiencing God recently. I did that with my brother, and we once a week we would talk about each chapter, and so that was really good. And there was a lot of challenging conversations, and I think it was helpful for both of us. So it's called Experiencing God. Do you remember the author?
Henry Blackaby. It's kind of a classic.
Yeah, there you go.
It's been a while since I've read that one, but it's a great one. Yeah. Yes, and so if anybody's listening and wants to get a hold of that book, we can point you in the right direction.
Yeah, although frankly, I hate to promote a book, but what are you going to do?
Well, I'm recommending this book here, Brandon, The Gospel According to the Simpsons. That might be more up your alley.
Yeah.
But folks, that's going to do it for this episode of the Deeply Devoted podcast. My thanks again to Brandon Mustful for joining me today to talk about strategic planning, faith at work, and of course the long-running animated TV show, The Simpsons. We are due up, folks, for our next Testimony Tuesday episode. And if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast and you would like to share about your faith journey, I would invite you to reach out to me. Use our podcast email, which is just podcast@efcbemidji.org. Or, maybe there's somebody out there that you would like to hear their story. Let me know, and maybe I'll kind of gently nudge them and see if they'd be willing to share their testimony on the podcast. But we'll be back in 2 weeks, folks, with another episode. And until then, have a great week, and thanks for listening.